good to be home. So, welcome home. Today okay, let me just say, I think I've finally done it. I think I wrote an actual sermon with no puns. I mean, I don't know if that's good or bad for me, but this one's going to be a little more serious, but not like draining or anything. It'll be okay, I promise. There's not much punny about Gideon, though, so, you know. The story of Gideon was always kind of one of my favorites, you know, this whole fleece idea and the fact that you really could question God. And although you don't want to put God to the test in certain ways, it's okay if you're not sure. And it has some great relatable aspects so many generations later. But looking at it again, like a little more deeply and not just taking someone's word for it in a Sunday school class, I've kind of changed a little bit. I still appreciate Gideon and maybe even a little more, but I don't necessarily consider him this big hero or hero of the faith. And perhaps that's the point of the whole story of Gideon and the larger story of the book of Judges. So let's begin with a reading, because Gideon's story actually runs for 3 chapters, and I'm not going to read them all, I promise. But our reading does start with Gideon in Judges 6, verses 1 through 10. The Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them unto the hand of Midian 7 years. The hand of Midian prevailed over Israel, and because of Midian, the Israelites provided for themselves hiding places in the mountains, caves, and strongholds. For whenever the Israelites put in seed, the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east would come up against them. They would encamp against them and destroy the produce of the land as far as the neighborhood of Gaza, and leave no sustenance in Israel, and no sheep, or ox, or donkey. For they and their livestock would come up, and they would even bring their tents as thick as locusts. Neither they nor their camels could be counted, so they wasted the land as they came in. Thus Israel was greatly impoverished because of Midian, and the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help. When the Israelites cried to the Lord on account of the Midianites, the Lord sent a prophet to the Israelites, and he said to them, Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I led you up from Egypt and brought you out of the house of slavery. And I delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of all who oppressed you, and drove them out before you and gave you their land. And I said to you, I am the Lord your God. You shall not pay reverence to the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you live. But you have not given heed to my voice. So in a nutshell, we've got this happened basically, I would say, the generations right after Joshua. So we have the Exodus has happened, and then Joshua comes in and pushes a lot of the Canaanites out, but not all of them. And then when Joshua dies, it's left to the Israelites, and of course they didn't do that. They didn't continue Joshua's mission. They just kind of did their own thing. And rather than standing apart and being God's people, they were doing things like building altars to Baal and Asherah poles, which is a goddess that the Canaanites also worshipped. And, Midian's own father had them. And the whole town, basically, they integrated with that concept rather than following God. So God was like, well, basically you love them so much, here, I'll let them have you. So here we are. And it's been 7 years. And so they said, help, we're sorry. It's this whole cycle. Gideon's story is recorded in the book of Judges. We first encounter Gideon threshing wheat in a wine press as part of this to try to hide it from the Midianites. If you remember all by a vowel. If you remember A Bug's Life, the movie, and all the grasshoppers would come and wipe out everything that the ants had done. I picture it kind of like that. maybe that was the intent, and I'm just now catching it. But anyway, so Gideon is down there threshing wheat, but he's doing it in a wine press to try to kind of hide. And the angel of the Lord comes down and hangs out with Gideon and lets him know he's called to rescue the people. It's like part of this whole cyclical refrain. Israel's delivered, like out of Egypt. Things go well for a while, then Israel starts to rebel and do bad stuff. Then they get conquered by some other group for a while. Then they get rescued and follow God for a while. Then they get too content with what they have, and then they go there, and then you kind of get the idea. It's kind of this big cycle, and that's somewhat the point of the book of Judges. But within even that intro, Gideon does some very non-hero things, at least in regards to our comic book view of heroes. In Judges 6:12, we read, "The angel of the Lord appeared to him," to Gideon, "and said to him, 'The Lord is with you, you mighty warrior.'" And Gideon responds with a question, which isn't necessarily wrong, but I picture it delivered with kind of this surly attitude. Verse 13, "Gideon answered him, 'But sir, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonderful deeds that our ancestors recounted to us, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has cast us off and given us into the hand of Midian.'" He's basically smarting off. The angel of the Lord says, "The Lord is with you," and he's like, "Prove it." I mean, you say that, but obviously, the Lord's not here. I'm threshing wheat in a wine press so that I don't starve to death, hopefully. Then he goes into this other rant about he's the weakest member, the weakest clan of Israel, he's no warrior, blah, blah, blah. But that wasn't the first question. He wasn't like, "Warrior, are you talking to me? What?" No, his first question was like, and his first question wasn't even like, "An angel of the Lord." It was, the angel says, "The Lord is with you." And he's like, "Not?" I mean, to me, I guess that's just how I figure it. And this kind of exchange seems to be a little bit of a trend. Not only the questioning, but the show me attitude. This is a hero? This is heroic? Or is it just arrogant or insecure? Or maybe it's just human, just like us. So first, after this, he tells the angel to prove the angel's identity, to validate the message he brings by waiting for Gideon to run off and prepare an offering. And Gideon runs off and prepares a goat and the unleavened bread. I mean, this wasn't like a 2-minute microwave thing. He does all of this and broth, all the stuff you're supposed to offer. Understandable, but he's not like, "Please let me honor you." He's like, the whole attitude is there. He's like, "Oh, well, if it's really the Lord, then you just wait here till I come back with my offering." So the angel does. The angel obliges, and then when Gideon comes back with the offering, the angel, it says, even dramatically consumes the offering with fire. In verse 21, if you care to read it, it says basically he touches the tip of, I think it's his cane, and it goes up in fire. So Gideon's experiencing all of this. At that point, he decides, okay, he'll be obedient. So the Lord tells him to tear down his father's altars, to Baal and Asherah. And he does do it, but even with that proof, he gets his servants and sneaks around at night to tear it down. And there's more to it. He sacrifices a bull that the angel of the Lord told him to sacrifice, and uses the wood from the altars to burn. And so it's not that he wasn't obedient. It's that even when he's obedient, he's kind of, I don't know, balking, so to speak. And again, that's the trend. And then after that obedient, that level, that task of obedience, God brought flocks of people to volunteer for Gideon's army. See, I've always missed out on those steps. I had learned that, like, well, there's this guy Gideon, and they're hiding from the Midianites, and he's threshing wheat in the wine press, and the angel comes, and he's like, whoa, the angel says, you're going to rescue everybody, you're going to defeat the Midianites, and he's like, wow, really? Well, if you're serious, then let me do this fleece thing. Well, no, we haven't got to that yet. And so that moral was like, it's okay to question, it's okay, if you're sincere, God will honor that. And it's still there, that moral's still there. But he calls out for help, and then these thousands of people come, Israelites come to help, and they're going to take on Midian. And that's where the fleece comes in. This big army is making plans to attack that encampment that we said, swarms like locusts. It's that time. So they're encamped, and so Israel's building up their army. They're like, we've had enough. We're done. We're ready to get out of here. Or we're ready for y'all to get out of here. And Gideon says in verse 36, then Gideon said to God, in order to see whether you will deliver Israel by my hand, as you have said. So he's saying, okay, I know you said this. And you're God, you've proven that, you've said this, but I want more proof. So I'm going to lay a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there's dew on the fleece alone, and it's dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you will deliver Israel by my hand, as you have said. There's that attitude again. Making the angel of the Lord wait. Then seeing him take care of that offering first, then sneaking around at night when he was obedient to destroy those altars, then not being executed for it, and his own father protecting him, which I don't want to make this a 2-day event. So his own father protected him with all that, and he didn't get executed, and then all the people showing up to join the ranks. Not only was that not enough, but at least in the English versions that I've read, Gideon doesn't really ask. He doesn't say, hey, Lord, if it please you, I would like to do this just for my own confidence. Can you help me out with this fleece thing? No. He tells God, you got to show me. Basically, I ain't doing it until you prove something. And God does, with 2 different fleeces. Because he does the wet fleece, dry ground, and then the next day he does the wet ground, dry fleece thing. Finally, Gideon obeys. And then they go through the culling down of the army's numbers, which as far as Gideon basically obeyed, did what he was told. But even then he's scared. So he's got now these 300 men against these uncountable Midianites and their people and their friends and their friends' friends and their cousins, third cousins, twice removed, ex-boyfriends, teacher from 5th grade. They're going against all these. So I do understand being scared, but it is just still kind of funny that we're like, ooh, Gideon's a big hero. So when the time comes to attack, in this time, God doesn't even give Gideon the opportunity to either say no or to put out some other kind of fleece. God's like, hey, here's what you're going to do. You're going to attack them, but if you're scared, if you're not sure, then first you and your servant sneak down into their encampment and just listen. And what you hear will give you strength and encouragement. So, after going through all of this, Mr. Faith Hero sneaks down like a little hobbit with his servant, and they overhear the Midianites. And one's talking about a dream, and the other one interprets the dream and basically says, hey, your dream means that these Israelites are going to wipe us out. That Gideon's army is totally going to destroy us. Okay, so that's encouraging. So what we hear about, or at least what I always heard as a kid about Gideon was, and then he marched in and all hell broke loose and it was all good for the Israelites. And that's kind of what happened. And not only that, but they didn't even have weapons. They basically lit torches and spread people out. So it looked like they had some huge army. And before they even marched in, the Midianites were busy drawing their swords, killing each other because they were so freaked out. They thought whoever had a sword was attacking them. And they basically slaughtered each other. And then the ones left were running. And so the army of 300 started chasing them. And there's more to that, but we get through all of that, and they're chasing them and doing stuff. Even after all that, after that huge victory, this hero is really adding to his resume. Some of the other things he does, and again, you can read it in Judges 6-9. He murders other Israelites because when they're chasing the fleeing leaders of the Midianites, they stopped, they were exhausted, they wanted help from the others. As the running begins, then they brought more of the army back. He was like, okay, everybody, we got them on the run now, everybody. So there's more and more of them now, the 300, and then more come. But then other Israelites were still kind of scared to get in the battle or to help out because they were like, hey, I don't know that I want anything to do with this because they'll probably come back and then they'll take it out on us. And so they didn't let him stop for food and sustenance and all that. So yeah, they weren't hospitable. But when he finishes wiping out the Midianites, he comes back to his fellow Israelites and slaughters them just because they wouldn't help him. Okay, this guy who by himself was scared at every step and testing and doing this, when other people were scared, he's like, oh, I'm going to slaughter you. So we've got Gideon, the man of faith, and we've got Gideon, the murderer now. And then, after that, he comes back. They want to make him king, because at this time, later in Judges, it says, they had no king, and each was doing what they thought was right. So it was kind of chaotic. And they're like, we want to make you king. Now, he did show some goodness here and says, no, I'm not supposed to be your king, neither is my family, neither are my sons. No, we're not your king. He was basically a judge. He was raised up as a judge. And so they did that right. But then he says, however, all of this loot you took from these Midianites, they had a lot of gold, they wore gold earrings and things like that. Give me some of it. So they gave him a bunch of gold, and let's see what he did. Oh, he melted it down and made a golden idol. I mean, hello? This is after Moses, y'all. This is after that whole golden calf thing, twice at least. This is after he chops down those altars of Baal and the Asherah poles, and he's seen all this, he's experienced all this, and then he's like, I know the best thing to do at this point. I'm going to make this golden ephod, which is something horrible, but he puts it on display. So Judges 8:27 says, Gideon made an ephod of it, the gold, and put it in his town in Ophrah, and all Israel prostituted themselves to it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and to his family. So they basically sold themselves to this image again. The exact same problem we've had. They did it again. And of course, the cycle continues. Once Gideon died, but there's peace because God fulfilled his promise. You're Gideon, and there's peace for, I think they said 40 years or so. Then Gideon dies. The Israelites go right back to worshiping Canaanite gods, sacrificing their kids, all of that, and assigning it to God. Later in Judges, it talks about how they're saying, well, God says, sacrifice your child. God never said that, but the Canaanite gods did, so they were kind of mixing all of that in. So why review all of this? Well, one, because the way I grew up thinking of Gideon was nothing like what's really in there. So I want to do that to encourage you to actually read some of these stories. Actually look into them. And don't be afraid. It doesn't lose its power or its impact because Gideon was even more human than we thought. But also, it still shows God will honor sincere questions, sometimes even when we're being petulant. Another reason, eventually, it's obedience that leads to deliverance. See, this whole cycle, illustrated by Gideon and others, it's a rescuing again and again, but it's the rescuing through someone's obedience. God works through us, even though and especially because we are imperfect. All of these folks, like Gideon, Abraham, Noah, all of them demonstrated obedience in one form or another. Some, like Gideon, were definitely reluctant, but still did it. But they still were obedient. And in the modern day note, it's good to remember that often the parts of Bible stories we're taught, not just Gideon, but others, not only as children but also as adults, are only tiny portions of the larger picture. And when we're not able to kind of, as we grow, as we mature, zoom out a little bit and absorb more, then we stay in that tiny picture too, and we put God in that tiny picture. And that's why I say it's important to do your own digging, even your own Bible reading, especially the parts around our favorite stories. We don't have to become scholars, but we can think for ourselves. Number 4. See, I have them numbered. See, I told you this was different. We can move beyond the idea that we should emulate this Bible hero or that Bible hero or all of this, and we should, follow in their steps. We can learn about them and from them, sure. But we can rest in the knowledge that God loves us and will equip us individually based on our needs and our journeys and our callings, to use that churchy word. Number 5. We can carry that to also appreciate someone else's contributions without putting them on a pedestal. I think a lot of the points of these are to not put people on a pedestal. That's what guides us to worship God, not melt down gold. When we get too into ourselves or too into others, and I'm looking, you're always looking for mentors, you're looking for people to follow, looking for people to lead. It's like, to bring in another old movie reference, the movie Hook with Robin Williams, when he's leaving Neverland and he's like, look out for the person smaller than you. And then the smallest person, look out for the Neverbugs. Take care of each other. So you're always going to be a leader and you're always going to be a follower of something. And it's important not to two-dimensionalize, probably not a word, but it's important not to flatten people in that role and not to think they're too high or too low. And it's important to do that with ourselves too. We can appreciate their contributions and not have to then either ignore the not so shiny parts, but also not have to chop their feet out from under them. Gideon was no saint, nor are we. We can relate to being imperfect, so it's okay to think of our Bible heroes as imperfect too. And we don't have to take it to that extreme and go, well, Gideon even did this and this and this, and God still loved him. Because, yeah, it's not that that's wrong, but it's still a form of shaming. Not that what he did was right, but it's like, it's just an illustration of everybody being human. And maybe it's a little exaggerated because it is a story carried down from generations before it was written down. Heroes are multifaceted. This isn't a comic book. This is life. And finally, we can carry this into life by allowing people to be imperfect, including ourselves. Strive to be obedient to what you sincerely believe God is directing. See, God will honor that. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to question. And it's okay to mess up and try again. See, the Bible's full of stories of the Spirit of God moving within and among people who are not perfect. So once again, Get away from that idea that, oh, I've sinned, God can't be near me. That's bull. Because right here, we have a guy who definitely wasn't like Mr. Perfect, and the Spirit of God was with him. And it also means if the Spirit of God is working with someone, you need to acknowledge that. It doesn't mean that God is condoning every aspect of that person, or that the Spirit of God is leading everything that person does, but it means God's not restricted by it. So let's get over ourselves with that, because God's love is still perfect. That's the point of Gideon, and so many others. Yeah, it's repetitive, but we kind of need it. Let us pray. God of Gideon, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Noah, of Adam, of Eve, of Steve.